Hey everyone, welcome to another 121 movie catch-up video. I am Peter, and I'm going to be talking about a few movies that I watched over the last couple of weeks that I did not watch for review purposes. I just watched because I like watching movies, and I felt like I wanted to tell you about them. Some of them might be a bit more well-known, some of them might not be, and hopefully you get a couple of recommendations in the mix here. So, without going too much into an introduction, I will just go straight into the first movie, which is How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World, which came out, of course, earlier this year. It is the final in the trilogy. I'll keep these mini reviews, spoiler free for the record. I'm a huge fan of the first two movies. I loved the first How to Train Your Dragon. I was caught off guard by it. I put it on one night. I didn't see it in theaters. I put it on, when it was streaming or whatever. And I was doing work. I was working on something whilst it was on the other screen. And after about 15-20 minutes, I'd stopped working and doing whatever I was doing and just started paying attention to the movie. And it wasn't that long after I started doing that I stopped watching it here and went into the main room and watched it on the bigger TV with the surround sound and everything else, because I got so drawn into the story that I wanted to experience it properly. And that's a sign of a great movie. I really get drawn into the characters. The music's fantastic. That's true throughout the movies. And then the second one, which I did see in theaters, I loved even more. I thought it was, just a little bit darker for, that sequel thing, which goes a little bit darker. I got emotional at points, and yeah, it really paid off for me. And I was looking forward to the third one. For whatever reason, I missed it in theaters, and I finally got to get to it this past week. Last week now, actually, it's last week. But I liked it a lot, and I think it probably is the weakest of the three. Is The Hidden World as the third one, but that's not saying a whole lot. That's not like saying it's that bad, or it's still a really good movie. I think maybe where it doesn't quite reach the heights of the first two is mainly just because some elements of it feel a little bit like they're familiar. Like the villain, for example, is very kind of just there and just feels like the villain that's there because we need the villain to be there, and so some of the plot, I guess, in that sense, isn't as amazing, perhaps, as 2 or 1 was. But the characters are still fantastic. The music's fantastic. The music does this great thing that I love in sequels sometimes, where I was getting kind of annoyed throughout the film because it was avoiding using the main theme, the main, dan 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 dan. I'm terrible at singing, so that probably did not get across what I was trying to do. But the main theme, I was waiting for it, and it did that thing where it saved it and used it in a big way in the last act, and I was like really excited by that. It always strikes a chord when they hold back like a theme that I associate with something until the pivotal moment where it's going to be the most effective. I always like that, and it was a fitting end to the story for both Hiccup and Toothless. And we've got on such a journey with these characters from being essentially teenagers in the first movie to now being at an age where they're thinking about having families and all that kind of thing. And it just, animation's still beautiful and the music's still great and the world's great. But mostly it's the characters for me. And this, again, it hit me kind of hard that the final 15-20 minutes, as much as I said that it might be the weakest of the three, the final 20 minutes is perfect. The final 20 minutes is exactly what the final movie in this trilogy needed to be. The plot up until then is pretty enjoyable, and you're along for the ride with all these characters. But it maybe doesn't just hit like that much new ground compared to the previous two. So with that said, I probably give it a really, really solid 8 out of 10. But no, I love this trilogy, and pretty soon me and Connor will be doing our top 10 trilogies lists. I think this, stands a reasonable chance. I'll have to look at what else I've got in contention to see if I've got more than 10 that are going to be there, but I feel like this has got a good chance. So that was a fairly well-known movie, mainstream, big DreamWorks animation release from this year. Now for something a little bit more obscure, and this is not an old movie. It came out in 2018, but it's a French film called Knife Plus Heart with the plus sign as opposed to the word. And it's set in 1979. It is kind of a modern giallo movie, or giallo movie, depending on how you pronounce it. So it is a horror film, and it's a movie I watched on Mubi, of all places. But it's set in 1979, and it's about this woman who runs a gay porn production company. And it's her actors who start being killed off. It's it's kind of, it sounds kind of wild when you just say it like that. And there is a lot of nudity in it. It is kind of raunchy, but it's not like the most extreme thing you've ever seen. I was actually really intrigued by this because I heard that M83 had done some of the music for it, and I like them a lot. So, that combined with horror movie, I was kind of intrigued. What was this going to be? Um, the results are kind of mixed. Like, I actually love the opening, like, 10-15 minutes. The opening 10-15 minutes, the introduction and just sort of the build up of the sleaziness and, like, the stalking of the killer and the first kill, as it were. And the killer has a very unique weapon. The killer has a big black dildo, which has, like, a pop-up blade that comes out the end of it. And, the opening has no dialogue. It is just nothing but music and just the actions on screen, and it's really effective. Unfortunately, after that, it kind of dies down and gets a little bit too slow paced. There's really not enough kills to really be invested in it as a just a straight up kind of slasher movie, and I don't think the character drama for the main character is all that compelling, and the then journey to try and solve who the killer is once a few murders have happened, honestly, is not all that exciting. Like, the movie got less interesting the more it went on for me, and the ending ultimately just kind of felt like, oh, I guess it's time to end the movie. Oh, it ended quickly. Okay. That's kind of how I felt about it, which is a shame because it did have a lot of style, especially early on. It does clearly have a vision of what it wants to be. The director, whose name I don't have in front of me, Yan Gonzalez is the director. It's it's a unique setting for a movie. It's primed for that kind of sleazy 70s feel. And in fact, the thing I'd compliment the most about the movie is how it looks and feels, because it does look like a movie from the 70s, even though it came out in 2018. It has that look to it. It looks like it was shot in film. It looks like they put a lot of effort into capturing the way things were lit in the movies in the 70s and things like that. And it does feel quite grungy and grimy, and it feels like you're in this seedy little underbelly and people are being killed off. Unfortunately, the story just isn't there. The story just really drops off very early on. It never really recovers. There's a lot to do with the main character wanting to be sort of reconciled with her girlfriend, and that stuff is just kind of tedious to get through. The character's not particularly likable either, which makes it hard to kind of follow her journey. And a lot of her sort of going to investigate the potential backstory of a killer is just kind of dull. The killer's backstory is really generic. It's any, like, something bad happened to someone in their past and it turned them into a killer. It's that. Like, and that's not a spoiler even. That's, like, it's very clear that that's what this is pretty early on. So yeah, I can't really recommend it. I wouldn't, like, rate it super low, admittedly. I'd probably still go as high as maybe like a 6 out of 10, just for the style, just for the look and feel of the film. Unfortunately, the other elements kind of let it down, but it does have enough of a look to it that I don't want to be too harsh on it. But ultimately, I was left kind of underwhelmed by basically everything after the first 15 minutes. So take that as, for what it's worth. Next up isn't a movie, in fact. It's a HBO special, which is about 45 minutes. So it's about the length of a TV episode, essentially. But it's called 7 Days in Hell, and this was recommended to me by a couple of people. It is a mockumentary starring Andy Samberg and Kit Harington, along with some John Hamm and Michael Sheen. Karen Gillan's got a small role. Lena Dunham's in there. Will Forte's in there. Mary Steenburgen. It's got a hell of a cast, and then a couple of real tennis players, which is relevant because the mockumentary is about a fake tennis match that took place in 1999. Well, that's what it says here. I could have sworn it was 2000 or 2001, but it says 1999 in this description, so I'll say 1999. But if this description's wrong, I want it to be known that I was calling it out. But yeah, so they play these two eccentric characters. Well, Andy Samberg's this ridiculous, rock and roll tennis player who's kind of wild. Kit Harington's this, like, soft-spoken British idiot who's been raised to be a tennis player his whole life and doesn't really seem to want it, but he's also a complete and utter simpleton who doesn't know how to respond to questions or anything like that. And it's a mockumentary. It plays in the build-up to the match. They're kind of both their rise in popularity and downfalls and whatnot. And then it obviously goes over the 7 days in hell. It's a tennis match that lasts 7 days because they just keep, they keep in a stalemate. So is it good? I've been kind of dodging that question, and it actually kind of is. I I was kind of expecting to maybe hate this. I didn't think I was going to think it was very funny, but it actually is quite funny quite often, and I wasn't really expecting that. And there are some jokes that don't land for me. I think there are a couple of really dumb jokes that really annoyed me, and it's kind of the sort of thing that I was rolling my eyes at. That I was kind of expecting the whole thing to be, was a couple of the jokes that really made me go, oh, yeah. But for every one of those, there's probably 5 other ones that really made me laugh, and there's a couple of standouts in particular that really got me belly laughing, and I was not expecting that. So credit where credit is due. I mean, that's all I really want to say about it. I feel like anything else would just be spoiling the jokes and the weird twists and turns. But you get a couple of real, Serena Williams and John McEnroe are in there doing interviews as if they're talking about real tennis stuff. It's a neat little thing. Like, I believe there's been some kind of spiritual follow-ups to this that have been other mockumentaries about other things, which I've not seen. But I certainly was entertained by this, if nothing else. So. It felt like it was worth throwing in here, even if it like isn't a proper movie. I thought I'd throw it in anyway. But the next movie I'm going to talk about is a 2018 film, which is available on Netflix because Netflix acquired the rights to it in most of the world. And that is an Indonesian film called The Night Comes For Us. And this was a film that I wanted to see from last year because I saw the trailer at some point last year and thought it looked really cool. As an action movie, because that's what it is. It's an action movie. One of the actors in here is from The Raid. I'm not sure if the creative people behind it are also from The Raid, but it's a very simple action movie in terms of plot. It's about the triads. I was trying to remember the word for Chinese gangsters. Because it's about how it like, and that is correct. Like, I know you're thinking I just said it's Indonesian, but like it connects to like the Chinese triads in the film, and the idea that there's these generals who are like there to sort of overlook all the operations around that part of the world, and it's basically about this one guy who decides he doesn't want to be this anymore and decides in kind of the spur of the moment to save this girl because they're murdering this whole village, and he decides to save this girl and murder everyone else who's there with them from the triads, and essentially becomes a target because he saved this girl. And one of his oldest friends, who's also like in the same kind of position that he's in, or close to it at least, is kind of sent after him. And ultimately, though, the plot is just, it's very simple. It's there. It's the story of something of a redemption, of like doing something good after a really bad life. And they send hundreds of people after him. Like, obviously, there's the main guy, which he knows, but they send hundreds and hundreds of foot soldiers after him. And this film's fantastic. It is not a deep film. It is not a film with, deep themes or a story that you're going to sit and analyze or anything like that. It is a fantastic action movie with some of the best action scenes I've seen in years. If anything, the film suffers because after the opening like 10, 15, maybe 20 minutes of setup, there's an action scene that essentially starts and doesn't finish for another 40 minutes. More or less. Like there's little breathers throughout it, but there's essentially non-stop action from about the 20-minute mark to the 60-minute mark, and it is absolutely phenomenal. Everything about it, and it's so inventive is what I really like. Is it's not just martial arts. It does mix martial arts with guns, but there's also lots of really little bits of gory violence in throughout. They'll use like broken glass that's sitting there to the side. They'll use any tool that's around. And because later on one of the fights takes place in a workshop with those tools, and you better believe the buzzsaw is at least attempted to be used, if not actually used. They try and use everything around them, and the good guy has a couple of like close friends who kind of like stand by his side and also help fight. And that's that's 40 minute, and that's kind of how this 40 minutes of like non-stop action happens. Is we kind of get we have him kind of on his own, and then it jumps back to them, but it's just floods and floods of people invading this apartment building, and it's just action and action and action, and it's great. It's brutal, it's visceral. The camera work's inventive, the way it sort of goes in and out windows and things like that. It's just a blast from start to finish, and it's almost the complaint I'd have is that the second half couldn't possibly live up to that. Luckily, there are some other highlights in the second half as well. It's not as relentless because ultimately there has to be some breathing after this big section. But it does also do a good job of introducing some characters that are memorable, even though they're not really deep characters. They're just, they have a cool look, they have a good presence, and they're intimidating, in terms of the villains kind of thing. It's purely action cinema that builds upon just simple visuals, bringing across who the characters are. It doesn't need to be any more complicated than that. And it does a great job, and it's really well shot and well executed, and it's exciting, which is like obviously the most important thing. Yeah, I had a blast with this movie. I felt jazzed after I watched it. Like I say, the middle obviously slows down a little bit, but it doesn't feel like it drags. It feels like you need to breathe. So, like, yes, please slow down for like 10 minutes just so I can, get myself back. Then it tries to tie in a bit more of the emotional story of the characters at that point. And then, of course, there's another big fight scene for like the final 25, 30 minutes, because, of course, there's a 2-hour movie. And it's funny, actually, because the final big fight scene that lasts for quite a while between the good guy and the bad guy, I feel like at the start of that, I was a little bit, like, almost over it. And, the fighting didn't seem that exciting compared to the first half. I was like, yeah, I mean, this is fine, but it's not as good as the first half. It goes so long, though, that it starts doing more and more inventive things. So the first, like, few minutes of the fight scene, first 5 minutes maybe, feels very like, oh, this feels a lot more basic than all the cool shit in the first half. But then it starts to evolve, and it gets a bit more brutal, it gets a bit more emotional, and it starts to really, it really does tell its stories through its fights. It's really quite great. So if you're a fan of action movies, and you like foreign cinema, and you're up for some subtitles, and which isn't even that big a deal in this movie, because so much of it's just fighting that you don't really need the subtitles all that often. Check out The Night Comes For Us. I believe it's on Netflix in most of the world. And because, I mean, obviously, I don't think they made it. They just acquired it after it was made in Indonesia. But I do think it technically makes this one of the best Netflix original movies that there is, if you count it as that. It may be the bit. I mean, what are the other contenders? Fundamentals of Caring was really good. The Babysitter was really good. Is this better than both of those? It might be. This is really good. This is a solid 8.5. It could rise to a 9, based purely on grading it as an action movie, upon repeat viewings, which I'm sure I will have at some point. Really, really good. Really, really slick. Really, really stylish. And do check it out. So that is good. And then the final movie that I want to talk about on this batch of movies is one that I just finished yesterday, and that is the Lego Batman movie, which I didn't see when it came out. I thought the Lego movie was okay. Like, I wasn't super into it. I liked the ending. I thought the final like 5-10 minutes of the Lego movie was a really nice kind of twist. I was just kind of, I don't know, bored by the actual plot for the rest of it. I wasn't really into the characters doing their things. I sometimes have this disconnect with certain like animated stuff. Not all that. Obviously, there's some animated stuff I love. Go and check out my ongoing top 100 movies for a couple of animated movies that I love. But I do sometimes have a hard time connecting to animated stuff. And the Lego movie was kind of that for me. Lego Batman, I like Will Arnett as Lego Batman. I think he's got the right comical but gruff voice to pull that off. And you sort of go in, you know what you're getting in terms of the sense of humor, and you kind of go with it. And it is pretty witty at times. There is actually surprisingly a lot of like little fun Easter eggs for Batman fans in this, and not just that they compare it, they reference the old movies and stuff like that, and have like Lego versions of the old Batmobiles in the Batcave or whatever. Like, obviously that stuff's all there, and all DC characters even. But there's some really obscure Batman characters that get mentioned in this. Some of which are kind of exciting to see. And then on top of that, it ends up becoming this meta story that kind of then incorporates other like Warner Brothers things. And I won't say any more than that for spoilers' sake. But it's got a lot of heart to it. It's a story about Batman being the lone brooding hero, and can he not be alone anymore? Can he have a Bat family? And as someone who's read a lot of Batman comics, like, yeah, this is a constant thing that we talk about, is that he has a big Bat family. We talk about the Robins, we talk about Batgirls, we talk about Alfred and his son Damien. Like, over the years he's built quite a family of characters who have bats on their chest or R's on their chest or whatever. And this movie's kind of about him accepting that and not being just the lone hero anymore. And because of that, it actually has a pretty decent heart. Now, I don't necessarily love it. Like, not all the jokes necessarily work for me. And like I say, it kind of works in a weird kind of like, okay, I accept this is this weird separate thing to anything else I've ever had. And it's fun in that sense. There is one thing that it does that annoys the shit out of me though. And that is that he's attracted to Barbara when he first meets her. And she's like already police commissioner. Like, can we not like do the whole Batman Batgirl might be a romance thing? Batgirl is much younger, should be much younger, and Batman's like a second father figure to her. And the Killing Joke animated movie has really scarred me for life as far as just suddenly deciding to make them something of a couple. And I want no part of it. It feels so cheap and lazy as well. It's like, oh, there's a woman character. He must be sexually attracted to her because that's all that can happen if there's a man and a woman on screen. So that irks me. Luckily, they don't do the sex on the roof like the Killing Joke did. Nor does it get anywhere close to that. But I did not appreciate the joke that he was into her. It annoyed me quite a bit. I will say I hated the voice of the Joker, who I think that was Zach Galifianakis. I don't necessarily hate him as an actor, but I just don't think his voice in this sounded like the Joker. Like, I think Batman's voice did that genius double thing where it both sounded like a Batman, but also a comedy version of Batman, but it still felt like Batman in a weird way, if that makes sense. It still felt like it was a comedy version of Batman. The Joker bizarrely sounds less jokey than normal. He almost just sounded too normal. I didn't like it. I didn't like his voice at all. What I did love though is that for Bane, they decided to, instead of going with a Mexican or an accent like that, they went with like a knockoff of Tom Hardy's voice from Dark Knight Rises, which I appreciate immensely because I love that voice. I love them playing that up. I also it had a lot of villains in there. I'm going to say mild spoiler warnings. I want to tell you some of the characters that are in this just so that I can talk about them. But I won't spoil too much of where the plot goes in terms of the big what Batman has to save the city from or anything like that. I won't talk about any of that. But it does a roll call earlier on, and we get to see Crazy Quill and most importantly Kite Man, and I kind of like that. I'm not gonna lie, I was into it. So no, I actually think the heart of the movie is really nice. The heart of the movie is really nice, but I don't love it at the same time. It is good. It's a good movie. It has a lot of jokes in it that appeal to me. I think that the thing that I'd compare it to more than anything is Teen Titans Go to the Movies. And if I'm picking between those two, I do actually like Teen Titans Go to the movies a little bit more. I think they both have a lot of heart in them. They both have a moral, which is really nice. I think the reason why I like Teen Titans Go to the Movies a little bit more is because Robin in that is kind of a little dickhead, and it's about him kind of realizing that and getting over it. And obviously Batman gets over a lot of his shit in this, but it's a lot more he's a lot more of a cynical prick in that movie who's very selfish, and the humor that comes from him being kind of awful to people is really funny. Whereas Batman here, we're playing with the joke that he's Batman and he's brooding to a fault, and that's kind of what we're playing with. We're playing with Batman tropes and having fun with them, which is fine. They're both good. They're both good movies. I think Teen Titans Go to the Movies just appeals to me a little bit better though. There's a real sort of, I don't know, cynical, Always Sunny-esque side to their sense of humor in that movie. They're both full of references to stuff though, and I think my dislike of the Lego Movie, and one of the things that carries over into this, is that ultimately I just don't like how these movies look. I don't like the look of Lego pieces all that much. At least for a movie, for a video game or for an animated series, or not an animated series, but for a, for Lego itself, for people playing with Lego, or for or for whatever is fine. But I think for a movie, there's just like something about the way Lego characters look that I just find really unengaging to look at. Um, and I think visually I don't find myself enjoying the movie that much. I think it looks kind of, what's the best way to put this? I don't know. It's kind of like it's like there's a lot of work going into making this look like Lego, but Lego by its nature is a very kind of blocky, flat thing. And I get that that's part of the charm for a lot of people, is that it's this kind of silly looking type of models, these type of character models. But for me, I think it's visually uninteresting to look at. So it suffers a little bit for me from that. The heads especially, I don't like the heads. The Lego heads really bug me. It's just how it is. It's just, I'm not a fan of the animation style more than anything. I think the Lego looks fine for the buildings. Like Lego, I mean, at its nature is at its best when it's a building or a structure of some kind, because it's made of bricks. Lego characters, I don't think look very good. I would have maybe went back to the drawing board back when they were designing what Lego people look like to go with everything else. But hey, that's just me. Yeah, is there anything else I want to add about the Lego movie? Yeah, some fun references to stuff. Lego Batman, that is, obviously. There's some fun references to stuff. Like, I'd watch the sequel, sure. I probably wouldn't rush out to the theater and see it, though. I'd see it like I did this one at some point later. And I had to cross it off as a Batman movie, technically. I had to cross it off the list. So, yeah, I guess I recommend it. If you like the Lego movie, you're probably gonna like this. And I like this more than the Lego movie. But I think that's because it was largely playing with characters and tropes and making fun of things that I'm aware of, because I'm a big Batman fan. I'm a big DC fan, and then to an extent just a movie fan. So I think I liked it a bit more because it appealed more to what I'm interested in. But it does have a heart, and it does have some nice voice actors, although I do think some of them are really out of place. Seriously, that Joker's terrible. I hate that Joker voice. I hate it really, really badly. But hey, and there are some giant leaps in physics at the end of this movie, which, I mean, I guess in a Lego universe they hold up. But I was getting my my scientist face on when I was thinking about the end of this. I'm thinking about Chernobyl, and I'm thinking just how smart that show made me feel. It made me feel like it was teaching me things. The physics at the end of this were making me feel like I was regressing to like an 8-year-old mentality or something like that. I don't know. I'm being facetious. I'm kidding. I'm not being serious. But yeah, Lego Batman movie's all right. Has some decent fun. If I'm rating it, I'd probably go with a straight 7. It is good. Has a lot of good qualities going for it. It's not something that I necessarily get super excited about myself, but there were some good jokes, and I did laugh quite a bit. So, yeah, Lego Batman movie, even. So that's me. That is the movies that I wanted to tell you about today. So that was How to Train Your Dragon 3, that was Knife Plus Heart, 7 Days in Hell, The Night Comes for Us, and the Lego Batman movie. So hopefully you enjoyed hearing some of my thoughts on these films, and maybe I recommended some lesser known things that you'd be curious to check out. But that is me. So by all means, let me know what you think of any of these movies in the comments below. You can like and subscribe, all that stuff. You can get me on the Twitters at Wooble89, for me, myself, that is. You can also get us on at mailed_fuzz for channel updates and all the various podcast things. You can, of course, support us in a number of ways. The main way, of course, being financially over at patreon.com/mailedfuzztv, where if you support us, you get you can support us for as little as $1 per month, but you get bonuses, you get exclusive episodes of some of our movie podcasts, and you get to vote in certain things at the higher tiers, and sponsorships even. And, the names you'll see at the end of the video are people who are full-on Patreon sponsors at the $20 tier. So there's a lot on offer over there, and there's also a nice list of all the content we do and all the various audio feeds we have. So go and have a look. But yeah, that is me. I mentioned earlier I'm doing a top 100 movies list. Parts 1 and 2 are up, which were the first 50 entries. Part 3 is coming soon with the next 25. And I should remind you that you can submit your own top 50s to mftvquestions@gmail.com, and the movies will get points based on where you put them in your rankings, and there'll be a results show of a top 100 in September 2019 as voted for by the Male Fuzz TV community. So please do consider doing that. And like I say, check out the movie podcast we have. We have a sci-fi movie podcast called Ace that I do with Tara, and we have a horror movie podcast that I do called Screams After Midnight with Tim, my boy Timmy V. So go check out those. But otherwise, that is me. So thank you once again for watching, guys. I'll see you guys next time. And if you can get it, it's always nice to have diplomatic immunity.